The moment my brother finished reading my private text messages out loud to 60 people at my own engagement party, I watched my fiancé's face go white. Not the embarrassed kind of white, the devastated kind. The kind that happens when the floor drops out from under you and there's nothing to grab. The room, which had been warm and loud with laughter, and the clink of wine glasses just seconds before, went so completely still that I could hear the hum of the banquet hall's heating system in the ceiling. My mother was standing near the gift table in her navy blazer. She didn't move. My father was at the bar with a glass of red wine halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly, like someone hitting pause. My best friend Willa, 3 tables over, was already rising from her seat. My brother lowered the microphone a little, surveyed the room, and smiled. "Relax, everyone," he said. "I'm just keeping it real. She'd want you all to know who you're toasting tonight. I'm going to come back to that moment. But first, you need to understand how we got there. My name is Sloan. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a registered occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center in Mississauga, Ontario. For 6 years, I've spent my days helping people rebuild the small, ordinary parts of life after injury or illness, teaching someone how to grip a pen again, how to button a shirt, how to trust their own hands to do what hands are supposed to do. It's quiet work. Nobody films it. Nobody brings it up at Thanksgiving. But I chose it on purpose, and I have never once regretted it. My brother is 4 years older and has been the headline act at every family gathering for as long as I can remember. He graduated near the top of his business program at Western, landed a consulting job in downtown Toronto before he was 26, and bought a condo in Liberty Village while I was still renting a basement apartment in Etobicoke and paying off student loans. Every dinner, every Sunday call, every casual visit home, somehow circled back to his latest deal, his latest promotion, his latest reason to be admired. My parents lit up differently when he walked into a room. I noticed it when I was 8 years old, and I've been noticing it ever since. The truth is, I didn't resent his success. I resented the way they decided his version of success was the only kind that counted. When I brought home a commendation letter from my program director, a full page about my work with a 23-year-old stroke patient who'd recovered enough function to return to college, my mother read it, said, "That's nice, sweetie," and turned to my brother to ask about a restaurant he'd recommended in the Distillery District. I drove home that evening, feeling like someone who'd handed in an assignment to an empty classroom. I'd spent a long time learning to need nothing from them. It was survival mostly. It worked mostly. So when Callum proposed last October, on a dock at a rented cabin near Parry Sound, at sunset, with no audience and no photographer and 0 performance, it felt like the most honest, uncomplicated joy I had ever been handed. Callum is a structural engineer. Quiet, precise, reliably funny at the right moments, and reliably silent at the rest. He'd met my family, decoded the dynamic within about 30 minutes of that first Christmas dinner, and never once asked me to pretend it was something other than what it was. We'd been together 4 years. The engagement felt like exhaling after holding my breath for a very long time. The party was my mother's idea. She wanted something proper, which in her vocabulary meant a catered evening at a banquet hall near our childhood home in Oakville, 60 guests, a seating chart, and a program. My brother volunteered to give a toast within about 48 hours of hearing about the engagement. I hesitated. I paused for a fraction of a second too long, and my mother gave me the look, the one that doesn't use words, but says you're being difficult, and I said yes. I have replayed that pause many times since. The hall was genuinely lovely on the night. The caterer did these butter chicken skewers as an appetizer that disappeared. In about 10 minutes, the lighting was soft and amber warm, and Callum's family, who are generous and easy in the way some families just are, made the whole room feel full in the best sense of the word. His mum held my hands when she arrived and told me she was so happy. His father found a quiet moment to say he was proud to be gaining me. I stood in the middle of my own engagement party and felt, for a specific stretch of time that I want to remember accurately, that my life was genuinely good. My brother arrived 40 minutes late, which was standard. He'd had a work thing in the city. He said, "Traffic was terrible, you know how it is." He poured himself a scotch, worked the room with the smooth confidence of someone who treats every social gathering as a professional opportunity, kissed my mother on the cheek, shook Callum's hand, and briefly hugged me. I noticed him step away at some point before dinner, standing near the side exit with his phone, maybe 5 minutes. But I was talking to Callum's aunt and didn't think to wonder why. Dinner was served at 7. The speeches started around 8:30, once the plates were cleared and coffee was going around. Callum's brother gave a toast that was funny and warm and mentioned the fact that Callum had talked about me for 3/4 of an hour on their first call after we'd met, before realizing he'd never actually said my name out loud. The room laughed in that full, genuine way. Then Willa spoke, and the room went quiet in a different way. The listening kind. And she talked about who I was when nobody was watching me, and I had to stare at a point on the ceiling to stop from completely falling apart. Then my brother took the microphone. He opened well, practiced, warm, the kind of speech someone gives when they've written it in their head a dozen times and know exactly how each beat lands. He talked about growing up together, about our parents, about watching me choose a career he didn't always understand but claimed to respect. He mentioned Callum briefly and said the right things about him. The room was with him. I was with him. I was genuinely starting to relax. Then he said, "But I think the people in this room who love Sloane deserve to know the full picture. And since she's always been the quiet one, I figured I'd help her out." Something in my stomach turned over. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and connected it to the venue's display screen. The same screen that had been showing our engagement slideshow earlier in the evening. And there, enlarged for every person in that room to see clearly, were screenshots. Screenshots of what appeared to be text messages from my phone, sent to my ex-boyfriend. I had not spoken to my ex in nearly 2 years. The last time I'd had any contact with him was rough 4 months ago, when he'd reached out to ask if I had any mental health resource recommendations for his younger sister, who was going through a serious crisis. I'd sent him a list of CMH contacts, a couple of crisis lines, a link to a community support program in his area. That was the entire conversation. I hadn't mentioned it to Callum because it was unremarkable. The equivalent of texting a phone number to a former classmate. It had not even crossed my mind. What my brother displayed on that screen was something else entirely. He had screenshotted only my side of the exchange, my responses, without his messages providing the context around them. Cropped and sequenced, my words read entirely differently. Things like, "I'm here for you," and "reach out whenever," and "I've been thinking about you," looked stripped of everything surrounding them, like something I had been hiding. Like warmth I wasn't supposed to be offering. He read them out loud, slowly, with deliberate pauses between each message. I could hear every syllable in the silence. I looked at Callum. He was staring at the projection screen. His jaw was set in a way I had never seen before, a locked, rigid stillness that told me everything. He was being held down with tremendous effort. When he turned and looked at me, his eyes weren't angry. They were broken open. That was so much worse than anger. My mother was still near the gift table. She was looking at the floor. Willa was standing up. I caught her eye across the room and gave the smallest shake of my head. She stopped, but she didn't sit back down. My brother finished, lowered the microphone an inch, and smiled at the room. "Relax, everyone. I'm just keeping it real." I picked up my clutch from the back of my chair. I smoothed the front of my dress, dark green silk, bought on sale at a boutique in Port Credit for $240, a treat I had saved up for specifically for this night. I walked to where Callum was sitting. I bent close to his ear and said quietly, "I need 20 minutes. I will explain everything. Please just wait for me." He didn't say anything, but he didn't leave. I walked out of the room without looking at my brother, without looking at my mother. I crossed the foyer, pushed through the heavy front door, and stepped out into the February cold of the parking lot. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, and I let myself cry for approximately 3 minutes. Not more, 3 minutes, and then I stopped. Because something had begun to press on me that had nothing to do with humiliation. A question that wouldn't leave me alone. My phone had never been out of my possession that evening. I hadn't lent it to anyone. I hadn't set it down unattended. But for my brother to have screenshots of that conversation, he would have needed to access my messages at some point I wasn't aware of. The last time he'd been inside my apartment was 6 months ago, when I'd asked him to drop off a package while I was at work. He still had a spare key I hadn't thought to ask back. He'd let himself in while I was gone. I opened my phone and went into the battery usage settings. Something Callum had shown me once when my phone had been draining faster than usual. I didn't understand all of what I was looking at, but near the top of the list were 2 applications I didn't recognize. One of them had no display icon, and its name was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to me. I took screenshots of everything on that screen. Then I called Willa. She answered before the first full ring had finished. I could hear the party noise behind her, then a door, then quiet. I told her everything: the battery screen, the unknown apps, the spare key, the 6-month timeline. She listened without interrupting. Then she said very calmly, "Sloan, you need to call someone tonight, not tomorrow, tonight." I called Callum instead. He came out to the parking lot. He sat in the passenger seat, and I handed him my phone with the full text thread open. His first message, every message, the context in its entirety. I watched him read it from the beginning. I watched his face move from that locked stillness into something that looked like relief collapsing into anger, in that order. He handed the phone back and looked out through the windshield. Then he said, "Who helped him get those messages?" We went back inside. We didn't address what had happened publicly. We thanked people for coming. We cut the cake. We said our goodbyes. My brother had migrated to the bar and was deep in conversation with one of my father's old colleagues. He caught my eye once from across the room. The expression on his face was not guilt. It was satisfaction, the satisfied look of someone who has done exactly what they intended to do. My parents didn't speak to me before Callum and I left. Back at my apartment, while I changed out of my dress, Callum sat at my kitchen table with his laptop and called a university friend who works in cybersecurity consulting in Waterloo. By midnight, that friend had identified the unknown application as commercially available monitoring software, marketed to employers and parents, but usable by anyone with brief physical access to a device. It had been installed on my phone directly, not remotely. It had been configured to forward message copies to a linked email account. The installation date aligned precisely with the evening my brother had spent alone in my apartment 6 months earlier. Callum's friend said, in the tone of someone being very careful with their words, "In Canada, intercepting private communications without consent is a criminal offense under the Criminal Code. Section 184. This is not ambiguous." I sat at my kitchen table at midnight in my pajamas, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold, and I thought about my brother's face in that moment when he'd said, "Relax, everyone." The ease of it, the absolute certainty that I would absorb what he'd done, the way I had absorbed everything for 31 years, silently, privately, without making it anyone's problem. I filed a report with the Ontario Provincial Police the next morning. I brought my phone, the screenshots from the battery menu, a written timeline of my brother's access to my apartment, and Callum, who came with me and gave a supporting statement. The officer who took my report was thorough and unhurried. She walked me through what would happen next without overpromising or minimizing. She said, "We'll be in touch." 48 hours later, 2 officers visited my brother at his Liberty Village condo. He was home mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, which I later learned was because he'd been working from home that week. They were there for nearly 2 hours. The investigation established things I hadn't even known to look for. The email account receiving my forwarded messages was traced to an address created under a slightly altered version of my brother's own name. Not creative, in retrospect, just convenient. Digital forensics confirmed the software had been installed from my physical device, while it was connected to a network that matched the Wi-Fi router registered to my apartment. His fingerprints, figuratively speaking, were on everything. He was charged under Section 184 of the Criminal Code of Canada. His lawyer got involved immediately. My mother called me 3 times in one evening. The first 2 voicemails were variations on "You're destroying this family, and why couldn't you let it go?" The third was quieter. She said she hadn't known he'd done that. She said she was sorry for standing at that gift table and not saying a single word. I kept the third message. I wasn't ready for it yet, but I kept it. My father texted once. It said, "He went too far. I've known that since that night. I'm sorry we didn't say so out loud. I saved that too." My brother accepted a conditional discharge to avoid a criminal record that would have ended certain career ambitions permanently. The conditions were 2 years of probation, mandatory counseling, a no-contact order with me, and disclosure to his employer's conduct compliance team. His trajectory, which had always been pointed so precisely upward, bent hard to the side. I was told, through third parties, that there had been a reassignment. I didn't ask for details. I filed a civil claim separately, for legal costs and emotional distress. The settlement paid off the last portion of my graduate school loans, which felt like a strange kind of symmetry. Callum's mother sent me the photos she'd taken on her phone throughout the evening. All of the early part of the party, before everything, in a shared album a week after everything concluded. Her message with it said only, "The real ones." Willa and I had breakfast at a diner in Hamilton that following Saturday. We sat in a vinyl booth for 3 hours. When I told her about the discharge and the civil outcome, she put her fork down and said, "I was standing up, you know. When he was reading those messages, I was about to say something." I told her I knew. She said, "Why did you stop me?" I thought about it. The true answer, because I needed it to be real, I said. Not defended, not explained away. I needed everyone in that room to see exactly what it was, without me trying to manage it. She looked at me for a long time and then nodded. The wedding is next September. A small venue on the Bruce Peninsula. 30 guests, maybe fewer. People who have shown us, over years of ordinary moments, that they are actually here. Callum's mum is planning the flowers with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting for this assignment. Willa is the only person standing beside me. My relationship with my parents is something I am still finding the shape of. My mother and I have had 2 long phone calls. They've been more honest than any conversations we had in the 30 years before them. She said once, quietly, that she thought she'd raised my brother to believe his drive excused everything. She cried a little when she said it. I didn't, but I heard her. My father and I had lunch near his office. He talked more than he usually does. He told me things about his own family, his own brother, an old fracture I'd never known the details of. I don't know exactly what any of it means or where it's going, but it was the first lunch in my adult life where I didn't drive home feeling like I'd left something important unsaid. My brother I have not contacted, and the no-contact order keeps that arrangement clean and uncomplicated. I don't spend much time thinking about him anymore. My phone is mine again. My conversations are mine. My quiet life, the one he was watching from the inside for 6 months without my knowledge, belongs only to me now. That sounds like it should be a small thing. It is not a small thing at all. I think about the parking lot sometimes. February dark, cold enough that my breath was visible, sitting alone in the driver's seat, with a mug of tea I hadn't brought with me, and a question I couldn't let go of. That was the moment everything pivoted. Not the party, not the microphone, not the projection screen. The parking lot. The decision to stop being the person who swallows it, and drives home, and waits to feel better, and to start being the person who looks at what's in front of her and follows it wherever it leads. The green dress is still in my closet. I haven't worn it again, but I haven't got rid of it either. It was a beautiful dress. It deserved a better night. Maybe it'll get one. I spent 6 years learning how to help people restore what they thought was gone for good. I believe it more now than I did before all of this. Recovery is almost never dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's mostly just getting up the next morning, and the morning after that, until one day you realize you are no longer the same person who got hurt. And the person you've become is someone you actually like. So if any of this sounds familiar to you, if someone in your life has dressed their cruelty up as honesty, leaned into a microphone in front of the people you love, and told you to relax, I want you to hear this. You do not have to make a scene. You do not have to perform your pain for anyone. Sometimes the most powerful exit is a quiet one. I'd really like to hear from you. If you had been in that room when my brother put those messages on the screen, would you have stood up and said something? Or do you think walking out in silence was the right call? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on that.